actually building directly off of the conversation that we've started here, that the Director Ketchum and his team have started us off with, is actually a session that I will be taking responsibility for, and expanding on issues related to aspects of the crane operator certification rule. As I mentioned at the beginning, my name is Graham Brent, and I'm the CEO of the NCCCO Foundation. Now, the foundation is a relatively new arrival on the construction safety scene. So permit me to say just a few things about the foundation before we get started here. And in the interest of time, I will keep this brief. The foundation is a separate 501c3 charitable organization, and it was formed back in 2018. But as you'll see here in just a couple of minutes, most of the activity that's been public has really happened this year in a virtual environment. We have a separate board of directors. Some of those names will be very familiar to you, I'm sure. And we have a mission, which is basically a safety mission: education, research, and making certification possible for those who might not otherwise have access to it. And that's a fairly broad group of people, or groups, I should say. We're an enthusiastic supporter of workforce development initiatives, Lift and Move USA, that you'll hear more about this afternoon. And there's a couple of others actually closer to home and also to my heart up here in Philadelphia, where I work from. Both Youth Build Philly, which actually Youth Build itself, some of you may be familiar with. There are several of them around the country. Actually got started in construction activity and helps to promote construction activity for those for whom college is not the best option. And the ACE Mentor Program, which traditionally has really been more involved in construction, engineering, and so forth for graduates, but is actually becoming more involved in the same kind of area that Lift and Move and Youth Build Philly are too. A couple of other areas that we expect to get more involved in. The COVID has sort of put a little bit of a wrinkle into some of those plans, but we'll be picking those back up as hopefully in the new year. But veterans outreach, which is a fairly well-subscribed space, but there are some areas that could still, I think, benefit from a slightly different approach, and we're looking at those now. And then one that really isn't very well addressed, and that's offender reentry. So there are a few pockets of activity in the construction business around this, but we really feel that there's an opportunity here, given that it's been so well documented that having a solid job on re-entry back into civilian life is so critical to making sure that folks don't go back into prison life. So watch those spaces as the months and years unfold. So what have we done so far in the first few months of real activity at the foundation? You're probably familiar with both of these studies that we produced. Some of the research started last year, but they were both published this year. You can get access to both of them free of charge, of course, from the NCCCO Foundation website. You see the web address there on the screen. And the crane operator evaluation study was really an attempt to see just how well understood the evaluation concept and details were by employers around the country. And we got some pretty good information. Those of you that were at the forum last year know that we released some preliminary data there, and it was pretty much well confirmed by the time we finished that study. Some important takeaways: some aspects quite well understood, some maybe less so. And then the study on the right that came out just a couple of months ago, and it was an attempt to see whether or not there was potential for virtual reality in certification testing. I think it's pretty well documented that virtual reality has a role to play in training, but can it really take a place of the actual operation of equipment in a virtual environment? And our conclusion there was maybe. More studies are clearly needed. And this is something that the foundation took on really with as a fairly groundbreaking study, frankly, even within the context of other disciplines. obviously we're familiar with aviation, where most of this concept originates, but in other types of certification program, there's been very little work done. And so we really felt like this was an important study. But certainly no firm conclusion there with respect to replacing exams, practical exams, for example, with virtual reality yet. Okay, well, let's take a look at two of the directories that we published, the foundation has published, and they build directly out of what you've heard from Director Ketchum and his team this afternoon. Two directories, one's called Who's Accredited, and the other one, the most similar certifications directory. So let's take a look at the first one. They actually have something in common. Well, they're about crane operator certification. And the directory Who's Accredited is derived from 1926-1427 in subpart CC, which is OSHA's requirement that operators must be certified, number one. And then who does that? Well, one of the options, as you've already heard today from Vernon Preston, is that a crane operator testing organization can do that. But for that crane operator testing organization to be recognized by federal OSHA, it needs to be accredited by a nationally recognized accrediting agency. I think most of us here in this virtual room are familiar with this, but it became something of an issue when probably about 18 months or so ago, it became a little unclear about who was accredited. You know, who were these accredited bodies? Because just like certification, accreditation is can be lost. It's for a limited period of time, has to be renewed, and it can be lost, just like certification can be lost as an individual. And it wasn't entirely clear from the questions we were getting. And at that time, originally, when I was with NCCCO on the certification side, exactly who qualified under OSHA's requirements. So we felt there was enough industry uncertainty regarding the various certification bodies and some actually new ones. There was one or two, one in particular that arrived after the rule was published. So we felt like there was a real opportunity here for the foundation as an independent entity to provide some reliable and accurate information around who was accredited at any one time. Like I said, it is a moving feast to some degree because the accreditation can be removed by the accrediting body or can be suspended. It's basically subject to an annual audit process. So we developed the Who's Accredited directory. It's a fairly short one because there's only so many accrediting bodies who are recognized, certification bodies who are recognized by the two accrediting bodies in the country. And they are ANSI, or now as it's fully known, the ANSI National Accreditation Board, and NCCA. So when you go to the website and this is the, you see on the screen the address of that directory, it's organized into three sections. The first section is simply a list of the accredited certification organizations at the point of publication of the directory. This one is actually updated October 26th, so it's current as of 3 days ago. And you see that there are four. And then we go into, by alphabetical order, a listing of the accredited certifications from each of those. There is a little bit of a nuance here and a little bit of a divergence from the way this is described in the OSHA rule, because when we talk about an accredited certification body, from ANSI's perspective and from NCCA's perspective, who do the accrediting, it is true that the certification body is accredited, but not every program that the certification body has developed is necessarily accredited. So there's a little bit of a gray area in there. So what we've done here, anyway, first of all, is to make sure that this is a useful document if you're looking to see who is providing OSHA compliant certifications to the industry. And then we added in any additional certifications that were also from those certification bodies that were accredited by the accrediting body. So you have a completely comprehensive list along with the accreditation expiration date. Again, just like certification, it comes with an expiration date and has to be renewed every 5 years, whether you get it from ANSI or whether you get it from NCCA. The third section is a section where we list any certification body that has been accredited at some point and is no longer accredited. And in this particular case, this certification body there was sort of a cascade of decisions at state level, initially by Hawaii, and then by Pennsylvania, and then by federal OSHA, and the subject of a temporary order coming from the federal agency around those certifications. So we felt it was really important to be clear about that, and just to be super clear about where this information is coming from. This is not something the foundation originates. It's coming directly from the accrediting bodies themselves. And you see at the bottom there, that's their direct link. So you can always go directly there. What we're really providing is simply putting all this information into one place because as you can see there, 3 of the certification bodies are accredited by ANSI or ANAB, the ANSI National Accreditation Board. I have to get used to that name. It's a little a change, not a change in the way the accreditation is done, simply a change in the way ANSI has restructured itself. And then there's one that's accredited by NCCA. Both are recognized by OSHA, and the source for those is obviously different. It's you can go to ANSI or NCCA. And so really what the foundation has done is simply put all this information into one place. We regularly check with both entities and make sure that we keep it updated, but there really hasn't been any change. If you've got one that was issued, I think in January, you won't find actually any changes. It's all basically the same information, but just for clarity, we like to reissue these occasionally. Okay, let's move on to the second one, which is actually brand new. And Vernon touched on this a little bit earlier when he was talking about the requirements for certification. So if we go all the way back to 2002, and some of you that are in this virtual room will know or will remember maybe, and maybe even have been part of the CDAC process that created the draft on which this rule was based, will realize that when the question came up, well, you know, how many certifications are there going to be? I mean, we're going to require operators that operate a lot of different type of cranes. Are we going to really require them to have a new certification for each one? So it was a bit of a challenge, and there were enough people with enough experience on the CDAC committee to say, no, we obviously don't want to have that happen. So what got written into the rule, into their draft, and was adopted by OSHA in the final rule, was that, as it says here, and Vernon covered this, if there is no accredited certification for a particular type of crane, then the next most similar applies. Well, you can see the rationale for that, but then how does that work in practice? And so who makes those determinations? And in the preamble to the final rule, OSHA itself said it didn't believe it was in the best position to make those determinations. So at NCCCO, I remember back then when I was with NCCCO itself, we sat down and scratched our heads and said, can we do something about this? And so we set up this entity called the Crane Type Advisory Group. It's now moved over to the foundation and operates under the foundation auspices, but still is the same group that was developed. And I think its name pretty much explains its purpose. As we see here, it started back in just a little bit over 3 years ago, and now comprises 14 crane industry experts who you'll get to look at in just a second. They just have an extraordinary amount of experience, not just in aggregate, but also in different types of cranes, in different types of situations. They've met over a dozen times in those 3 years, and they've made over 25 different determinations about what in their view, what constitutes the most similar. And we finally went live just 2 months ago, a little bit under 2 months ago, with the most similar certifications directory. which is on the Foundation website. We'll come to that in just a second. The mission and vision were just natural outgrowths of the purpose behind the need to find some way of interpreting for the industry's sake, not for OSHA, because we don't. The only entity that interprets OSHA is OSHA, but we did want to provide some kind of advice and direction, even if it was just to certificates themselves and to the certification bodies. And so this is really what's motivated the group. This is the group. And some of you will know these faces. Some of you are on the call, and a couple you'll see a little bit later on in this presentation. But they all are experts, and their experience is just awe-inspiring. And they address the issues with great dedication, and we really, really do appreciate that. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple of practical examples, and it'll allow me to walk you through a little bit how the most similar certification directory works. We just put a few examples of some of the items that have come to the CTAG group in its 3-year history, which may at first glance seem obvious, but actually on closer interpretation are not. So there are 3 sections to the directory, and this particular section actually has 3 parts, not to be confused. And this is really the meat of the directory. This is where you'll find the 3 sections, and we've grouped them into these 3 parts so these determinations are either been made by the type of equipment that's been proposed to the group, and all of these have come to the group from the industry. So they're all actual questions from employers or operators that say, look, I'm operating this type of equipment. You don't have a certification. No one has a certification program for it. So, what certification am I supposed to have? So where it's a type of equipment, it will fall into part 1. Where it's more about not so much the equipment type, because there may be 1, 2, or 3 more certifications that sort of look like they might apply, but we're really not sure. Well, that's where the type of installation comes into play. So it could be a type of crane that has a certification program for it, but it's in such an unusual installation that it brings into question which is actually the most appropriate certification. And then thirdly, in the smallest section this is just such an unusual looking piece of equipment, we're really not sure where it fits. That is very much the shortest section, because we really try and fit everything into part 1 and part 2. Well, let's look how it works in practice. So I do have a couple of examples to look at. This is a real life example that just actually happened less than a month ago. And it was an inquiry that came to us from a project superintendent out in Hawaii, as a matter of fact. And this is, as you can see, a precast concrete launcher. And there is no accredited certification available for it, either from NCCCO, from ECA, from NCCER, or OECP. Nobody actually has one that specifically says you are a certified precast launcher operator. So the question was, okay, well, what is the most appropriate certification for this? So as it happened, this was a determination that had already been made by CTAG. So in this particular case, what I did was direct the inquiry to the website, just like I'm doing here with these arrows. And the first place to go in this case, would have been by type of equipment. Clicking on that section, that takes you to the next area here, which I'm describing with my mouse. And sure enough, we actually happen to have a precast launcher in the system, in the directory, because the question had been asked before, as it turned out. And the determination made by CTAG was that the closest certification, based on the type of crane it was, the way it operated, the sort of controls it had, and the skills and knowledge needed, would be overhead crane. And so that was the determination made and the information sent back to the inquirer. So that's a pretty good and well-documented example of part 1 of that directory. Let's take a look at part 2. This is a crane that's clearly mounted to a tower, and it, on first glance, looks like it might be a knuckle boom, it might be a truck crane, it might, what exactly is it? And so the CTAG took a long, hard look at this, but it again had already been determined. Now we're in the type of installation, because this is where the type of installation could actually affect the determination. And you see, by clicking on part 2, it takes you to the part 2 section of the directory. And there, in fact, is a crane of that type. And the CTAG group had made the determination that the most similar certification, based on the criteria that I just mentioned, is telescopic boom crane fixed cab. So that's how the system works. And there are the 2 other sections. One actually is the background to this, tried to outline in brief, is why there's a need for this determination process, and what CTAG is really up to, and what the regulatory context is. And that's here, the navigating a pathway to compliance. And then you can take a long look, close look, short look, whichever your preference, at the actual individual biographies and resumes of the individual members of the Crane Type Advisory Group. Because the obvious question is, well, who are these people, and what's their credentials for making these determinations? I don't think after you've read those, you'll be in any doubt about the qualifications of those individuals. So if you have questions, such as we just got from Hawaii, feel free to email those to cranetype@ncccofoundation.org, and we would do our very best to respond to that in a timely fashion.